The December 13, 2018 meeting of the Williamsburg City Council will come to order. Ms. Burcham, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Maslin.
Here.
Ms. Ramsey.
Here.
Mayor Freiling.
Here.
Vice Mayor Pons.
Here.
Mr. Zhang is absent.
Mr. Zhang sends his regrets. He unfortunately had a law school exam that he could not reschedule and was forced to make a decision. I think he made the right one. Before us today, we have the council meeting minutes of November 5, November 8, and council special meeting of December 4. Are there any edits or corrections to those minutes?
Mr. Mayor, I move to approve the minutes as mailed.
Second.
Ms. Burcham?
Mr. Maslin.
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey.
Aye.
Mayor Freiling.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pons.
Aye.
Mr. Zhang.
We have no matters of special privilege today, so we will move right to the public hearings, the first of which is PCR 18-025, proposed ordinance number 18-15, amending Chapter 21, Zoning Article 5, parking by amending Section 21-710, amending subparagraph C. Welcome, Ms. Murphy.
Thank you. Mayor Freiling and members of City Council, the Downtown Parking District was approved on April 11, 2013. The intent was to establish special parking requirements appropriate to the unique character of the district. The district was established to allow property owners the flexibility to redevelop their property or to change a business in their use in their building without having to provide for additional parking. In the district, you must provide one off-street parking space for each residential unit, with senior housing requiring one space for every 2 units. No off-street parking is required for non-residential uses located in the district. And in this slide overhead, outlined in red is the current district. It is implied in the zoning ordinance that removal of parking spaces is not allowed unless approval is granted. Staff is requesting the change to make it clear that removal of any parking in the downtown parking district requires a special use permit approved by City Council. Planning Commission held a public hearing on November the 14th. Planning Commission recommends to City Council by a vote of 6-1 approval of the text change to Section 21-710C as proposed in proposed ordinance 18-15. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Yeah, so thanks. So pretty clear what you said, but just to be more clear, currently the ordinance just says removal has to be approved, but it doesn't say by whom.
That's correct.
So a property owner can say, well, I approve it. And
so staff has made the interpretation that it requires a special use permit to do that. So in order to make that clear from now forward, if this change is made, anyone can look at the ordinance and determine that to remove any parking spaces in the downtown area as of today would require a special use permit. It's just a clarification in the ordinance text, which I think didn't get put into the ordinance when it was redone in 2011.
Thank you.
2013.
I just wanted to clarify that all of the parking lots that are included in the red area on the map are included.
That's correct. That includes the properties along Richmond Road, the properties along Henry, the city lots that are highlighted in there. It's not just the Colonial Williamsburg parking lots. It's all the parking that's in that red section.
And just to be clear, if it's parking in front of someone's establishment, but it's not a lot, is that included as well?
When you say in front of the establishment, on the right-of-way?
Like in front of, say, the Blue Talent, the 30-minute parking there.
That's city property.
So that would be covered as well.
That's city property. It's not. This is a zoning ordinance which covers the parking in the private parking lots. Right.
Just wanted to clarify that.
But I'm sure if any parking is changed on the city right-of-way, staff would bring that to council also, just like we've done with the parking regulations, to give you a heads up on those.
And if there wanted to be a change in the designation of spots or times or things like that, that would also need to come before staff.
This just writes the parking. To remove any parking spaces requires approval by City Council.
Okay.
That's how it's written.
All right. Thank you.
Mr. Maslin, question for Ms.
Several
Murphy?
questions. In terms of the residential requirement, requiring off-site parking, does that off-site parking have to be on the same parcel?
It has to be somewhere in the district, so you have to make arrangements. We've required it's hard for property owners to go somewhere else and get the off-site parking, like Griffin Arms, for example. When they added the residential, they provided the parking on-site. The same for the adjacent property who added the residential property also. So,
But by way of example, if the Goodwin building saw a use that was residential, would parking spaces in the parking structure qualify?
it depends on if they have parking in the parking structure that's not counted towards the downtown parking. So I think in the Colonial Williamsburg, I think has a certain amount of allocated spaces in the parking garage for their use. And so if the amount of parking spaces for the use they propose would go to that use, then they would not have exclusive uses of that anymore. So it's kind of hard to explain that, but the intent is in the downtown district that the change of use of any buildings you have for residential to provide additional parking at the rate that's shown in there, which is different than what it is in other districts. But it allows, say, a retail shop to change to a restaurant without providing additional parking that's required in other districts in the city. The ratio for retail is 1 per 200, but the ratio for a restaurant is 1 per 100. So you got a different ratio. So this allows in this red area the businesses to change the types of use without having to provide additional parking, because the parking study basically said we have ample parking downtown.
So questions about the parking lots affected. Approximately how many parking lots and how many owners are there in the downtown parking district?
You've got, of course, the churches, the Tribe Square lot, the college lots on Richmond Road, the restaurants on Richmond Road, the restaurants on Scotland Street. You've got city lots. You've got Colonial Williamsburg lots. You have the Granger lots, the Sakalis lots. I mean, it's probably 40, 50 different property owners.
And that answered my second question. Third question, of those property owners, how many of them do you think were aware of what we were talking about, since the proposed ordinance was really, the discussion was circling around P3?
Well, with any text change, we do not notify property owners. It's notified by mailing. It's done as we do typically any other text change, where we put it in the paper and we post the signs and those types of things. So I can't tell you how many individuals know about this change.
Addressing handicap parking necessary, when the 2013 downtown parking district plan was approved, how much analysis was conducted to assess the adequacy of parking for users it needs to serve, and specifically what analysis was done to ensure that there was sufficient handicap parking for the people using our parking lots?
There was not an analysis done for the handicap parking spaces. The analysis done for the parking study indicated the amount of handicap parking spaces in the downtown area, which met ordinance requirements. Basically, when a property comes in, say for a site plan approval, if it wasn't in the downtown, the building code regulates the number of handicap parking spaces, which refers back to the ADA requirements. So staff makes sure that those spaces, those number of spaces are provided for in any site plan before we would recommend approval. In some instances, a property owner may decide that they want additional spaces, which is fine as long as the applicant meets the parking requirement. We don't regulate that you have to have exactly the number required for the building code. So it's what we counted when we've done all of those changes from 96 to 2013. We actually, for all of those changes, went out and certified the number of parking spaces and signed it and put it into the code that this is how many that existed in those lots. We did not separate them from regular parking to handicap parking.
Now, when P3 development was under review, there seemed to be a lot of confusion related to handicap parking. My understanding is that in 2016, P3 had 6 handicap parking spaces. There are currently only 4 handicap parking spaces. The applicant submitted a plan which indicated that only 2 handicap spaces would be provided. Is that correct?
I have to go back and look through the records. I remembered, I think 6 or 7 in the parking study, and I think I saw 4 or 5 when I rode through there. The parking requirements are based on the size of a parking lot. So if you look at the accessible parking spaces needed, the regulations, the ADA regulations basically say from a parking lot with 1 to 25 spaces is required to have 1 space. From 26 to 50, you're required to have 2 spaces, and one of those needs to be a van accessible space. So if staff is looking at that parking lot, we're looking at the number of parking spaces, and it goes up and increases as the numbers go. That's what we look at to make sure that they meet the building code requirements, which reflects back to the ADA requirements.
And we know that the building code requirements are a minimum.
That's correct.
And really meant to apply universally and not take into specific
Well, what's interesting, it
requirements
also reflects back to the ADA requirements, which is, I've copied also those numbers.
But despite all the discussion of parking issues related to P3, was there any evidence presented to indicate that the need for handicap parking was diminished by 2/3?
No, sir.
Yeah, that's all the questions I have.
I just want to clarify, in case there's any confusion here. There is no discussion today about the P3 parking lot. The applicant has pulled that item. It's out of the process. If it comes back up, this is a P3 conversion, that will start over again, going through the Planning Commission and coming to City Council. This conversation today is about the larger downtown parking district of which P3 happens to be a part. And I would imagine it was during that conversation that you recognized that there was this ambiguity in the language of the downtown parking district. And correct me if I'm wrong, but all we're trying to do is make clear here that if somebody wants to change number of parking spaces, that approval that they have to get is via a special use permit, so that there are no surprises. Because if somebody thinks they can get a staff approval and they find out then they have to go through the special use permit process, which can take a couple of months to navigate, and there's a fee involved, that may be a surprise that they would not like to have.
That's correct.
That's correct. So
That's
that's
correct.
all we're talking about, is the method by which a change in the number of parking spaces can be approved. Ms. Shelton, who determines the building code?
State,
Who determines ADA requirements?
the federal government.
And does this, and I don't know the answer, Mr. Maslin raising the question makes me wonder, does the city have the authority in zoning to require more accessible or handicapped spaces than the state and federal government require?
In conditional zoning, so a special use permit or a special exception, if there's a condition involving the property that creates an irregularity, then I would say yes. I think council can certainly consider the number of handicap parking spaces when they are looking at one of these special exception requests. Property owner can, of course, voluntarily agree as part of their application to have more than the minimum number of handicap spaces.
But if we tried to make an across-the-board zoning decision, we would be subject to challenge on
I
that?
think that would be a violation of the Dillon Rule.
That's what I was going to point out. There's a difference between having the authority to do it, being able to defend the decision.
Now we're going to have the public hearing. Anybody who'd like to address this matter, please come forward, state your name and address. Seeing nobody, close the public hearing, come back to council for discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I don't see that this is removing any parking or limiting ADA parking or have anything to do with that, to your point in your comment a minute ago. Clearly what we're doing is just cleaning up the ordinance so that it is more clear applicant who wishes to remove parking that they have to go through this process. And so I'm comfortable with making the amendment to the text.
I agree.
I'd like to recommend sending the proposed ordinance back to Planning Commission for 2 reasons. Number one, to allow the discussion related to the parking lots in the downtown district other than the previous Planning Commission discussion, which was really restricted to P3, and also enabled discussion on provisions for protecting parking needs. So this proposed ordinance is protecting the parking spots that we have as of today, if it was approved. I'd like to also see discussion about protecting handicap parkings as of today.
Ms. Murphy, may I ask you a question? In the Planning Commission conversation, was it restricted to the P3 lot, or was it about the downtown parking district in general?
It was about the downtown parking district in general, and they actually voted separately on the downtown parking district and the other text change from the P3. They took a separate vote on it.
Okay. And if there's a will of this body, whether or not we can do it, still seems to be arguable, but if we want to look at the number of handicap parking spaces, would it make sense to send this back to Planning Commission, in your opinion, or would it be better just to resolve this ambiguity in the language and then have an additional discussion about handicap parking?
Staff would prefer approving the ordinance today as written, so there's no ambiguity, so it's very clear. And if council would like to look at the other portion, the accessible parking, staff would prefer doing that at a separate from this ordinance.
During that special use
I think
permit.
it's important that we get this on the book to clarify.
And in future, if we did approve this today, in the future, any application coming forward would have to go through that SUP process, which would then allow Planning Commission and council and
To look
staff
at
It would
to,
require a Planning Commission public hearing and a City Council.
and at that time, we could talk about handicap accessible spots and
I was just going to say, I think it has to be remembered that a lot of people who might benefit from being close to an establishment by virtue of a handicap spot do not have a handicapped sticker or a hang tag. So just by sometimes increasing the number of handicap spots doesn't help those who might be a little mobility challenged access the building easier.
My preference would be to get the language clarified, clean this up, and then if there's more discussion to be done on the other question, then we pursue
agree.
that separately.
So, in terms of the Planning Commission meeting, was not the three motions submitted under one memo from planning, and I'm looking at the minutes, and it looks like there was one vote for all three.
It was written up in the original memorandum as three separate cases. It was very clear that this case was a staff proposal to amend the ordinance for the downtown parking district. And Mr. Councilman Frowling or Pons was correct. As part of looking at that review for that special use permit, we noticed this ambiguity in the ordinance, so we wanted to go ahead and get that done as soon as possible. So Planning Commission did hold a public hearing on all three cases at the same time, but they voted separately on this ordinance and tied the text change because they saw the importance of approval for this and wanted to keep it separate from the vote for the P3 parking lot. So I think Planning Commission fully understood that it was the downtown parking district, not just the P3 parking lot.
Mr. Maslin? Okay. Do I have a motion?
I move to approve proposed ordinance 18-15 to clarify that the removal of any parking spaces in the downtown parking district requires a special use permit from City Council.
second.
Ms. Bertram?
Mr. Maslin,
Abstain.
Ms. Ramsey,
Aye.
Mayor Freiling,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pons.
Aye.
Okay, this takes us to our second public hearing, which is PCR 18-028, consideration and approval of a request by Williamsburg James City County Public Schools to amend the special use permit for James Blair Middle School to include a 12-foot by 16-foot bike shed. Good afternoon, Ms. Burke.
Good afternoon. Williamsburg James City County Public Schools is requesting to amend their special use permit granted for James Blair Middle School on January 14, 2016 by adding a 12-foot by 16-foot storage shed behind the school at 101 Long Hill Road. The shed will be used to store bikes, and those bikes will be used for instructional purposes at the school. The applicants are proposing the addition of the bike shed on the northwest side of the school. There's currently no place on site to safely and securely store these bicycles used for physical education and after-school programs. The proposed shed will provide a convenient location for the bicycles to be stored while ensuring they are secured while they're not being used. The proposed project is in harmony with the adopted comprehensive plan and the intent and purpose of the zoning ordinance. The proposed use is in harmony with the character of the adjacent properties and will not result in the destruction, loss, or damage of any feature determined to be of significant ecological, scenic, or historic importance. This project is designed and sited so it will not hinder or discourage the appropriate development or use of adjacent properties in the surrounding neighborhoods. Planning Commission held a public hearing on November 14th, and no one spoke at the public hearing. Planning Commission recommended to City Council by a vote of 7-0 to approve the amendment to the special use permit for James Blair Middle School to include a 12-foot by 16-foot bike shed on the north side of the property for the purposes of storing and securing bicycles. I'm available if you have any questions.
I have no questions.
No, I have none.
And just to make sure, this is to store bikes that belong to the school?
Yes.
And not to the students who are coming to school?
Correct. There are bike racks on site for the students.
Okay, with that, we'll open the public hearing. Anybody who would like to address council, please come forward. Seeing no one, I'll come back to council for discussion and a motion.
I think for me, it's a simple approval. If we can help the school systems enhance programming by making bikes more readily available and store them in a safe place.
I agree. It's perfectly reasonable to have an enclosed space where they're kept safe and secure, and so I'm perfectly fine with it.
I agree.
And protected from the elements, which then potentially adds to their length of service, which saves money. And a bike shed is far less visually intrusive than an array of bikes stored any other way that I can think of.
Particularly in the location where they plan on putting it.
So I'd be happy to take a motion.
Go
Go
ahead,
ahead.
please.
Everybody's so polite.
I move to approve PCR 18-028, a special use permit for Williamsburg, James City County Public Schools to amend the special use permit for James Blair Middle School to include a 12 by 16-foot bike shed as shown on the preliminary site plan as recommended by Planning Commission.
Second.
Ms. Bertram?
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Freiling?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pons?
Aye.
This takes us to our reports, the first of which is the monthly financial statement. Mr. Trivett, anything you'd like to highlight?
Mayor, in light of the fact that we're going to have the CAFR presented later in the agenda, if there are any questions, we'll be glad to answer them.
Okay. We'll move on to monthly departmental operating reports. Anything there you'd like to highlight?
Just as presented.
Any questions? Okay, city manager reports.
None this month.
City attorney report.
I'll have things a little later in the agenda.
I was afraid of that. It seems like we're just moving along, but things are going to slow down here in a minute. That takes us to unfinished business, release of funds to EDA for FY19 Downtown Vibrancy implementation of lighting on Prince George Street. We heard a presentation on this Monday at our work session. Any further discussion on the matter? Ms. DeWitt, anything you'd like to add at this point?
I just received a text message from Will Fiddler, and the large tree that we're speaking of that's on college property is a willow oak, and it does lose its leaves in the winter. It's the only thing I have to add.
Well, thank you for that bit of information.
Yesterday in the conversation.
Did everybody happen to get the opportunity to see the tree that's currently on Prince George Street in the pot?
Right.
I saw 2 trees.
Okay. So anything, discussion, a motion?
Well, I was just going to say that seeing the 2 trees, I like the larger tree better and the softer, warmer lights. And I think that was the decision that, the recommendation as well.
So I think this is, enhances the downtown area, and it kind of satisfies the goal that we set out for the EDA to look into this matter, and so.
And I know this, we all know this, but to make use of the pots year-round instead of just seasonally makes a lot of sense. And this is a far less intrusive way of installing lighting in the way it will appear during the day as opposed to stringing lights across the street, which,
And it gets lights on the street.
and granted, this is only generally in this time of year, but that's more when you need the lights on the street because of the dark, getting dark early. Do I have a motion?
I move that City Council authorize the city manager to release $15,000 of the FY 2019 Downtown Vibrancy Implementation Funding to the Economic Development Authority to be used for the lighting of potted evergreens on Prince George Street and the large tree at the southwest intersection of Prince George and North Boundary Streets until March 1, 2019.
Second.
Ms. Burcham?
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Freiling?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pons?
This takes us to new business, of which we have 7 items today. The first of which is proposed ordinance 18-17, consideration of an ordinance to provide for the abatement of a nuisance due to criminal blight. Is this Ms. Shelton?
It is. House Bill 594 in this year's General Assembly session provided an option for local governments to adopt an ordinance that would allow them to take advantage of a blight process for specific properties where criminal blight is occurring. And criminal blight is defined as the regular presence on the property of persons under the influence of controlled substances, the regular use of the property for the purpose of illegally possessing, manufacturing, or distributing controlled substances, the regular use of the property for the purpose of engaging in commercial sex acts, or repeated acts of the malicious discharge of a firearm within a building or a dwelling that would constitute a criminal act under the Virginia Code or the city ordinances. So that's criminal blight as it's defined under the state code, and this creates a process by which the chief of police can execute an affidavit with the specifics on that property, send a notice to the property owner that this is occurring on their property. The property owner then gets a period of time to address those concerns. If nothing happens, then the police chief again has to notify the property owner that the city is going to take action on this as a criminal blight matter if nothing is done, and again gives the property owner a period of time to resolve those concerns. And if after all of that is done, nothing has happened, then the statute gives the city the authority to abate the blight or to take the property owner to court and get a court order ordering the owner to abate the blight. So this language in this ordinance tracks the state code with respect to what we're allowed to do and the notice that has to be provided to the property owner and then what happens after that. And it's staff's recommendation that City Council adopt this as a tool for the police department to use for specific properties where there is a real problem.
Questions?
So just to clarify, we're talking about the property. The behavior on the property, if the police see something happening illegally, they have the full authority to go in and make arrests and do what they have to do. So this is not talking about...
This is a separate action as to the real property.
Question?
No questions.
So the difference is that this is where there's the potential for a situation where the police are called repeatedly for violations of the law at the same property that is creating a public nuisance. It's also drawing away from police resources to deal with other issues for which they have responsibility within the community.
That's correct.
And it's generally, I think, undesirable. How do you define abate the blight?
To take the action necessary to eliminate the public health and safety issues. So as a practical matter, that would mean locking the doors. If the property was in sufficiently bad condition, then the building inspector could take additional action with respect to what he's allowed to do under state law with unsafe structures.
It seems like it would be much easier for an individual property owner to abate the blight as opposed to the municipality or the police force doing something.
That's, well, easier, but whether it happens or not is the question.
But I mean, what would a municipality do?
Prevent people from going on the property. Okay. So if someone went on the property after it is condemned, after it's locked, then that would be a separate criminal offense.
Questions, comments?
I
do have one more question. If we adopt this and then we don't utilize it if there's an opportunity to? Does that create a problem?
No, it's an option for the locality to use. It's another tool that's there. There are other tools that we can use. I mean, very often what happens is a telephone call is made to a property owner, the problem is explained, the problem is resolved, and we never get to any kind of a formal process. So this is a tool to use in the event that we have a property where the property owner is not available, we can't reach them, they're not responsive, and we need to force the issue.
And really, this is just updating our code to match what the state has. It gives us that new resource that we don't currently have. So.
This puts the statute into the city code.
If there's no other, I'll make a move. I move the council adopt proposed ordinance 18-17.
Second.
Ms. Bertram?
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Freiling?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Now we have proposed ordinance 18-18, consideration of an ordinance to provide for the establishment of minimum operating standards for massage parlors. Is this Ms. Shelton again?
Yes. So we've had a couple of requests through the zoning department for massage parlors to operate, and the way that we define spa is so broad that these facilities fall into that category. We don't have anything in the city code that regulates that, and really until the last year or two it really hasn't been that big of an issue. However, there is also nothing in the state code that regulates the operations of massage parlors, just the licenses for individual therapists. This is a fairly common practice in larger cities. We just have not had a need to have it in the city code, but we think given the fact that we've had this request a few times in the last couple of years, it would be wise to have some minimal standards for this in the city code, and so we have drafted this ordinance. It's consistent with ordinances from other cities on the peninsula, and it's staff's recommendation that council adopt the ordinance.
I have no questions.
I have no questions.
Has the proposed ordinance language been reviewed with the Commonwealth's attorney?
Yes.
And would that office be the one to bring action?
Technically, the city attorney's office has the right to prosecute violations of the city code concurrently with the Commonwealth's attorney's office. That does not typically mean that the city attorney's office would handle this type of a criminal offense. That would normally happen through the Commonwealth's attorney's office, but that would be a discussion that I would have with Mr. Green.
So I think, if we're getting more applications for massage parlors, I think we ought to have a better code in place that city staff has some direction and knows, how to implement the discussion on it. So I would support this.
I would support it also.
Do I have a motion?
I move the city council adopts proposed ordinance 18-18.
Second.
Ms. Bertram?
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Freiling?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Takes us to our third item today, of new business, which is proposed ordinance 18-19, prohibition of prostitution and other related offenses. Ms. Shelton?
Well, so while we're looking at all of these issues related to this topic, these types of topics, we took a look at this at the request of the police department, and we discovered that the city code has not been updated since 1975. So the reality of commercial sex activities is that they don't exactly happen the way that the 1975 city code defines them, and so again, we have borrowed heavily from our neighbors to better define this activity as it occurs, and so that's what this does. It defines disorderly houses, it defines what activity is unlawful, and it makes it a Class 1 misdemeanor, which is, of course, the highest offense that we are able to provide in the city code. It's much more specific, and I think from the perspective of being an actual usable ordinance is much better for the police department's purposes. And so, again, staff would recommend that City Council approved proposed ordinance 18-19.
I have no questions.
The only question I had was, what about sex trafficking? Does that?
This is the actual offense itself. This is not the pattern and practice in a larger scale. So it would be
So that would not be necessarily be covered underneath
No.
here.
So I think, adding the language in that regulates, prostitution helps aid elimination of human trafficking. So I think they work hand in hand. And so for me, this makes our community safer, and if we could do that, we should.
And to that, it doesn't serve the police department well to have limited language that does not effectively define the potential crime that they're trying to address. So this just helps clarify that. Do I have a motion?
I move the council adopt proposed ordinance 18-19.
Second.
Ms. Burcham?
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Fryling?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Our fourth item of new business today is consideration and approval of Resolution 18-14, recognizing members of the Williamsburg Volunteer Fire Department as an integral part of the city's public safety program, including for purposes of continued eligibility for Line of Duty Act or LOTA benefits.
Pat and I were just playing a visual game of paper, rock, scissors, see who was going to present this.
I was just so used to looking at Michelle. Welcome, Chief Dent.
Thank you. Mayor Fryling, members of the council, the Virginia Line of Duty Act, known as LOTA, established in Title 9.1 of the Code of Virginia, was enacted in 1972 to provide benefits to eligible family members of eligible employees and volunteers killed in the line of duty, and to those eligible members and volunteers who are disabled in the line of duty, and also supplying benefits to their family members. Some of the eligible members examples are law enforcement, career and volunteer firefighters, correctional officers, and rescue squad members, and there's many more that are grouped in that category. Currently, LOTA is managed by the Virginia Retirement System. Recently, Finance Director Barbara Dameron received an email from Virginia Retirement System indicating that there was not a resolution on file for the City of Williamsburg recognizing the Williamsburg Volunteer Fire Department members as an integral part of the public safety program for the City of Williamsburg. As part of that Virginia Code, they require that a resolution be on file or approved by the governing body in order for those members of the Williamsburg Volunteer Fire Department to be covered under line of duty. So while we know that the members have been around since 1754 and they've been recognized in this community as an integral part of the public safety program here, we just don't have an official resolution adopting that. So it's important that we recognize them for their service to the community, but it also continues their eligibility for line of duty benefits. The city pays a premium for each participant in the program, and there's a different rate for career members, public safety members, and then a lower rate for volunteer members. Currently, the city's cost for volunteer inclusion into the line of duty benefits is approximately $4,600.
In total per year?
Yes, sir. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Just an oversight that we haven't done this. Yeah.
And actually, in calling around to other localities, there's numerous localities across the Commonwealth that received the same notification. It was just assumed, and they want the resolution on file.
Has anyone ever been declined benefits because of the resolution not being on file?
No, ma'am.
Okay. So, again, just cleaning up the language.
Yes.
I'll turn to our resident former volunteer firefighter.
Realizing our roots go back to 1754, there's no retroactive payments required, are there? I'm good.
Okay. I think we all agree this is
Right.
the right thing to do. Do you have a motion?
I move that City Council approve proposed Resolution 18-14.
Second.
Ms. Burcham?
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Fryling?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pons?
Aye.
This takes us to our fifth item, consideration and adoption of Resolution 18-15, establishing guidelines for discussion, consideration, and decision for additional school capacity growth. Mr. Trivett, is this you?
Yes, it is. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The resolution is before you as a product of several months, maybe even a year's worth of conversation concerning capacities and growth trends in the joint school system with James City County. And one of the things that has been a topic of discussion is the fact that we now find ourselves in a situation where both our elementary class of students and our high school class of students are operating at or near effective capacity for the facilities. Maybe not all of those schools, but certainly many of them, particularly in the elementary class, that are at capacity. And so we are now challenged as a joint school system with the choices of redistricting or funding expansions inside those classes to create additional space. In some cases, that could be expansions of existing facilities or construction of new facilities. Either way, a very expensive proposition when you're talking about the facilities, the size and scope of a high school or an elementary school. And so the joint bodies all agreed that we needed to have some type of process to get in front of that decision-making process so that we could be more in a planning mindset as opposed to a reactive mindset as this occurs. And so the decision of the bodies involved was that we establish trigger points at which certain actions would occur. And the task of determining what the trigger point should be and what the action would be was handed down to a newly formed committee of our joint school system called the Long Range Planning Committee that operates inside the school district. I am currently the Williamsburg representative to that body, and we spent several months talking about what the trigger point should be and then establishing what the action would be. And the product is before you today after having come through the school liaison committee and having also been adopted previously by the school board, and then a resolution was adopted by the James City County Board of Supervisors this week. So we are now being asked to adopt the same resolution. And effectively what it does, it establishes a process for doing that long-range planning before action is required and necessary. And so what it says is that if any or all elementary or secondary school reaches 85% of enrollment projections at the low number, which is a very conservative calculation for enrollment, then the Long-Range Planning Committee would begin evaluating potential solutions to that problem. And those potential solutions can include everything that I listed previously, including redistricting, expanding existing facilities, or building a new school.
Could also include doing nothing.
It absolutely could include
Just
doing
want to clarify that.
That's right.
It doesn't require action, it just requires
right.
discussion and analysis.
If you look at the growth trend, which is what the Long Range Planning Committee would be doing, there's a difference between a steep curve and a gradual curve, right? And so if we looked at that gradual curve and decided that the effective capacity would be fine for 5, 10, 15 years before we hit that problem, then it may be that the recommendation is not to do anything. The resolution also requires reviewing these numbers every year. So even if that were the recommendation, it wouldn't be like we'd be missing the opportunity. And then the second part of the resolution is establishing at what point that consideration of the Long Range Planning Committee moves forward out of the Long Range Planning Committee to the school board and then on to the James City County Board of Supervisors and, of course, the Williamsburg City Council. And that would be at 90% using the same low student projection. And so what's interesting about the resolution is it in no way binds the joint school system, including all three partners, to take the action that's recommended. So if the Long Range Planning Committee, even at 90%, sent forward a recommendation, James City County's Board of Supervisors, Williamsburg City Council, and the school board will all have the opportunity to say, we disagree with the finding, we're going to wait, we're going to try another tactic. All this really does is establishes a point at which we're really going to start looking at planning for the growth. In terms of impact on city council and city operations, what this does is it helps us with cost planning and cost mitigation, because what we see now in the capital improvement plan that's been presented so far by the school board is there are very large numbers in the CIP years that are quickly approaching, including next year and the year after particularly. And it's because we're already in an 85 and 90% effective capacity category for both classes of elementary and high. So if this in some way puts us in front of that decision so that we can better mitigate those costs and not have to bear them in the future all at one time, I think we've done ourselves a good service.
Questions? Mr. School Liaison.
Well, I was going to say, I think it's fair to say that the Long Range Planning Committee will be a standard seating committee, because but the chances of ever getting below 85% in any of these schools is probably not going to happen. I don't think we're going to get there. But, I think so I don't have any questions. You want to go to discussions? Or?
Yeah, for you can discuss.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. For years, the almost 11 years I've been on council and before that on planning commission, but you hear in the community when the discussion comes up of whether we need to redistrict or we need to expand or build new schools, there's some people in the community that says, oh, well, this is such a shock to us. Why didn't the governing bodies do more to be prepared for that, for this discussion? And so I think in doing this, we're putting together these trigger points to help us obviously plan better, but then also to take away the ability for folks to say, we weren't thinking about this ahead of time. So I think it's a smart move to do. I just hope that we can one day get to an effective capacity that is comfortable.
And I would pretty much second the Vice Mayor's comments, and I think some of the words that Andrew used are important to remember, that it's an evaluation, it's a process, it's an annual review, and that it doesn't dictate action. It just helps us be better prepared. And if this had been in place 10, 12 years ago, perhaps we wouldn't be at the situation where we are now. So I see no problem approving the resolution.
I agree, and I think it's good that the city manager's got a seat on the long-range facility planning, because we've seen cases where things don't make sense in terms of what was done on a facilities management standpoint, and then projects that just get dropped because nobody's tracking them.
So I agree. Schools are complicated because it's not just building the school. You have to find a site for the school that makes sense within the population distribution and where there's available land that's not, or that's reasonably affordable. But it's also complicated because then even if you build a school, that by its very nature requires an entire redistricting of that level of the school system. So I agree with the point about the more time we have to be aware of this, think about it, and be planning for it, the better. I just want to emphasize this does not guarantee that if we hit 85%, we're going to start building a new school. There has to be a discussion, an analysis of what the trends tell us, a look at what the track record of our future forecasting has been, and then apply that to whether it could be remediated by redistricting or expansion of the existing facilities to extend the horizon before which we would need to build a new school. One thing I would like to see, Mr. Trivett, and if we get it, I'm missing it. Every year, the school is forecasting, or I think it's every year, they're forecasting over one more year on a period of time about what their growth is going to be. And whenever those growth numbers are put out there are multiple scenarios, and you've been talking about the low number, which is the most conservative growth. What I don't see us talking about is at the end of each year, how did the growth match up to what the forecast was? Just like we do with the budget. We have, here's our budgeted expenses, our budgeted revenues, here's what our forecast is, and here's what the actual was. So that we have a sense of, is the forecasting that they're doing from year to year very accurate, fairly accurate, not accurate? I'm not looking for an answer, I'm just asking for some kind of regular report on that. Because I think that would help build confidence in the community in those forecast numbers the closer they see the actual enrollment hitting those targets or those forecasts. Mr. Maslin.
Following up to that point, I think also it'd be good, what I've seen that reported out is the school district is saying they're within 1% of their projections. Right. I'd like to also see it reported out looking at the overage. Don't take all the students as the denominator. Mm-hmm. Look at the overage and what's the percent that we are in terms of projecting the overage.
Okay.
Because I think that would be more meaningful.
Okay. I'll pass that on to the school system.
So with that, I'm comfortable with the resolution that's been provided by the school board.
So shall we move that the City Council adopt Resolution 18-15 as drafted?
Second.
Ms. Bertram?
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Freiling?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pons?
Aye.
This takes us to item number 6. Presentation on the comprehensive annual financial report for fiscal year ending June 30, 2018. Ms. Dameron, will you be leading this off, or Ms. Wall?
I'd like to introduce Ann Wall with Robertson Farmer Cox, who's the city's auditor, and let her start with an overview of the audit, and then I'll continue with a presentation of the financial results.
Thank you, Ms. Dameron. Welcome, Ms. Wall. Thanks for being here today. Sorry about the trouble on Monday.
Sorry, I could not be here Monday. Well, it's my pleasure to be here today and present to you the city's comprehensive annual financial report for the year ended June 30th, 2018. Local governments are required to have an annual audit conducted each year. It's required by the Code of Virginia. The uniform guidance that governs your federal program dollars requires it. The city charter, I believe, requires it, and it's certainly a good business practice to have an annual audit conducted. So yours has been complete, and you're in compliance with all those regulations. You engaged us to perform a financial statement audit and a compliance report for the city. Local government audits are subject to much regulation. Your audit was was in compliance with the auditing standards generally accepted in the United States, the audit specifications published by the Auditor of Public Account for counties, cities, and towns, the standards for financial audits contained in government auditing standards issued by the Comptroller General, and the Single Audit Act amendments, and the uniform guidance issued by OMB. And that's what governs the federal program dollars. And all of these standards and all of these guidelines drive the audit fieldwork that we do, the questions that we ask, and the contents of the city's CAFR. I am pleased to report to City Council that the city received an unmodified or clean opinion on the financial statement presentation. That's the opinion that's in the very front of the audit book, as many of our clients have started to call it a book because it's just gotten so lengthy. But the first 3 pages are our independent auditor's report. And that was a clean opinion, and that means that the financial statements included in the document are materially correct and presented in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. And that opinion is based on the substantive work that we did in the field, examining evidence supporting the amounts and the disclosures in the financial statements. The other 2 reports that we issue are in the back of the report. They're in the compliance section under that last tab, and they have to do with our opinion on your federal program dollars compliance and our review of internal controls. And those opinions were clean, or those reports were clean as well. So if there were significant material or compliance findings, they would have been reported in one of those 3 auditors' reports. The financial document has been submitted to the Auditor of Public Accounts in accordance with the guidelines. It was required to be submitted by November 30th, along with the comparative cost report forms. In addition, the Code of Virginia was amended last year, and it will require localities to submit a notarized statement from the chief elected officer and the chief administrative officer certifying that the results have been presented to the governing body, which is being accomplished today. This report has also been submitted to the Federal Audit Clearinghouse through their online portal. As part of our audit fieldwork, I'm pleased to report to you that the cooperation we received from city staff was very professional. Everyone was receptive to our inquiries and requests for information. During our fieldwork, staff made our work a priority, and it was very well communicated when we were going to be here. We were here in June and then again for a week in September. We did propose a few adjusting entries at the conclusion of the audit. We reviewed those with management, and we all agreed that they needed to be posted to the accounting system so that the accounting system now mirrors the financials that are presented within the city's CAFR. This year, the city continued the transition to the new accounting system to the Tyler Munis in FY18. It's just kind of an ongoing process. And then there was new leadership in the finance department with the retirement of Phil Serra and the hiring of Barbara Dameron as the new finance director in early 2018. From an audit standpoint, the transition went very well. The audit report was completed on a timely basis, and we're here in December presenting it, and there were no internal control findings noted. The CAFR is a very comprehensive document, and the report this year is over 160 pages, which I believe is about 30 pages longer than last year. It contains actual information, budgeted statistical information, analysis, and I know Ms. Dameron's going to go through some of that information in her presentation. This report, again, will be submitted to the Government Finance Officers Association to apply for the Certificate of Achievement in Financial Reporting. The city has received this award for the last 32 years, I believe, and we all believe that this document will qualify for the certificate as well. The Finance Department assisted in the preparation of this report fairly extensively. There's a lot of pieces of the document that have to be prepared in-house. There's the management's discussion and analysis, which I believe starts on page 4, which really provides an overview of the financial statements and detailed comparisons to the prior year. That had to be written in-house. There's a transmittal letter, which is really kind of an overview of the city. And then there are statistical tables in the document that have to be prepared in-house. We encountered no difficulties in dealing with management in performing our audit, and I'm pleased to report there were no disagreements over financial reporting or internal control matters. We did not issue a management letter this year relative to any internal control matters, but we did review internal controls via sampling methods during the audit. This year, GASB 75, Governmental Accounting Standards 75, which is accounting and financial reporting for post-employment benefits other than pensions, was effective for the city's CAFR and for all local government CAFRs this year. And the purpose of that standard was to improve the financial reporting for OPEBs by state and local governments and establish standards for recognizing and measuring those liabilities. There's deferred inflows and deferred outflows associated with those and expenses. The city actually has 2 OPEBs that they offer, and they're both through the Virginia retirement system. The group life insurance for retirees, and as you talked a little bit about earlier, the LODA, the Line of Duty Act, that's also considered a OPEB as it's offered to, not that it includes a one-time death benefit, but there's also health insurance benefits that are available for covered dependents of those individuals. And that includes coverage for employees as well as the volunteers. These OPEBs have been reported within these financial statements. From a practical standpoint, they really probably added the 30 pages to the particular document, having to report on the OPEBs. The source of the information that's included within the city's CAFR was the actuarial information. VRS had to employ an actuary to estimate these liabilities and then really allocate them out to the participating local governments. The results are in your audited financial statements include a restatement of financial position on page 104, footnote 17, to add the liabilities of about $1.9 million to the governmental activities and $103,000 to the business type activities. There's also expanded footnote disclosures. Footnotes 15 and 16 are both related to the OPEBs, and there's new required supplementary information tables. Exhibits 15 through 20 are related to the OPEB information. And then that really concludes my comments. We did review the audit process in these financial statements, probably in a little bit greater detail with the audit committee last week as part of this process. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wall. And if I may just ask questions and see if my colleagues have any. Just for anybody who may be watching who's not comfortable with GASB speak, OPEB is obligation for post-employment benefits?
It's other post-employment benefits, and it's other than pensions, because pensions are the one that everybody thinks of for after retirement, and that one was covered in a GASB 68 about 3 years ago, and that's also offered through VRS for the employees of the city.
And you, a week or two ago, you presented this to the audit committee of the city. Can you just tell council about your experience with audit committees in other jurisdictions in Virginia?
Well, our firm, we audit local governments across the Commonwealth, and in our office in Richmond, we audit 20 localities that have to report to the Auditor of Public Accounts, so they're all of a similar size of the city. And the city of Williamsburg is the only one of our 20 clients that actually has an audit committee where we meet with them annually and review the audit. And again, in in a smaller setting, it's easier to go through the document. We don't go through it page by page, but we can go through the document in a more kind of informal setting. And I think and you have two citizens that are on the committee as well.
Who are also
as,
accounting professionals.
Exactly. And they have a depth of knowledge, and they ask a lot of questions, and they've reviewed the audit and had the audit, I guess, for a few weeks. So it's just a good, I think it's a good aspect of the kind of the controls and the policies that the city has set up.
Questions from Ms. Wall?
I don't have any questions for Ms. Wall, no, thank you. But thank you for coming and doing that, and glad to hear the report was clean.
Good.
Yes, no questions.
One question. So you mentioned that, changing our financial system and, upgrading it to something that'll give us probably improved financial management. But when governments change systems like that, there's always a chance that something might be missed, something might not convert over. Did you do any sampling or tests to look at that?
We probably would have done that because FY17 balances were rolled over into FY18. So yes, sir. And the way the new system set up, previously so many things were driven by journal entry. And so with the new system, the automation is improved so that there's probably less chance for certain types of errors to occur because of the automation. But I do think next year, as part of the city's audit, we do this from year to year. We do an information system review, and I think next year for the FY19 audit would be good. We have an IT specialist in our firm that meets with the IT specialist here and kind of reviews some of that, and I think that would be a good idea to do that for FY19 audit.
Thank you.
I think one thing that's worth noting, you talked about, clean audit and unqualified opinion, but this is a year where we had the refunding of bonds, we had new bond revenue coming in, all into a new enterprise system with the new finance director, and at some point we had a new interim city manager, and then throw in new GASB standards like 75. It's just pretty impressive that all that happens in 1 year and it still comes out well.
I would agree, and so I think that the finance department has very good support staff in there as well, and just the members of the city kind of all came together and allowed this to continue to be a good financial reporting good year.
So I'd like to thank Ms. Dameron for that, but also somebody who probably doesn't get a lot of notice in this room is Vicki Herrick, our Deputy Finance Director, who's been that sort of glue that holds together across the term. So I just want to thank Vicki for all of her work. Thank you, Ms. Wall.
Thank you.
Ms. Dameron?
Good afternoon. I would like to walk us through the financial results for year ending fiscal 2018. And we'd like to look at a review of the operations in the general fund as well as the financial position for the general fund and the working capital for the utilities. I'd also like to take a look at some multi-year trends in terms of revenues and expenditures as well as the fund balance and surpluses. And then we'd also like to report on the pension plan funding for this is the fourth year that we've been reporting under GASB statement number 68. And as Ann mentioned, we implemented other post-employment benefits for GASB 75 this year. And then I'd like to just note the management discussion and analysis. That's kind of the Cliff Note version of what happened during the year, and it should be read in conjunction with the financial statements, should the notes to the financial statements. And, oops, got happy with my finger there. This slide shows the general fund revenues by source, and it includes the sales tax fund. And as you can see here, we had a 1.5% increase, which equated to about $630,000. And a little bit later, I'm going to talk about some of the variances on the general fund slides. But since those slides won't include the sales tax, I'd like to mention here that our sales tax for the year came in at $4.7 million, which is $318,000 more compared to 2017. And then as we look at the general fund expenditures on this slide, you can see that we had an increase of 6.8%. I think what really stands out on this slide is the decrease in capital project spending, the increase in debt service, as well as the increase in public safety. The increase in public safety did include the pay income study plan implementation, but that was only a piece of the increase. We also saw an increase in professional services, and that was related to a change in vendors that I believe does a more comprehensive evaluation. We also saw an increase in maintenance service contracts for that category, as well as purchases for in the fire department for tires, and additional purchase of EMS supplies. In terms of capital projects, the decrease there relates to some property that we purchased in 2017 and didn't have a similar purchase in 2018. And the debt service increase, $4.4 million of that relates to the refunding of bonds and payments that were either made to pay down bonds or to pay to escrow agent for future repayment of that debt service. And then we look at the operating revenues over or under budget in the general fund, and you can see that we had $906,000 over budget in total. And the next couple of slides will speak to where those variances were, just briefly. So property tax was over budget $93,000. The majority of that was in the real estate. And then we had smaller overages in the delinquent, smaller overages in business personal property and personal property and penalties. The delinquent business personal property is up there because we had we were under budget in that category that offset some of those overages. Other local taxes was over $580,000. Business license exceeded the budget by $270,000 or 15%. Recordation taxes was over budget by $192,000 or 96%. Meals came in over budget about $67,000, which equated to 1%. Hotel and motel was over about 2%. And our $2 lodging tax came in under budget it was under budget by 0.6%. And then our communication taxes continued to decline. And this year it was under budget by 6.8% or $48,000. Permits were over budget $107,000. The majority of that was in building permits, but there were some other overages, smaller ones in categories such as land use application fee, plumbing permits, site plan review fees, and fire protection. Our fines were over budget by $54,000, and that was related to two types of fines. One was parking that was over $29,000, and our court fines that was over $24,000. Our use of money and property was a mixed bag there. We came under a budget slightly, but that consisted of the rent for the community building was over budget, as was sale of surplus equipment, while the rent for City Square and the Triangle building came in under budget. And then our charges for services came in over budget $35,000, and that was pretty evenly split between fees for athletics, grave openings, some miscellaneous fees in that category, and then the Waller meal entrance and rental fees. And again, our miscellaneous, where that came in slightly under budget, it was made up of two variances. One was EMS recovery fees, which was under budget by about $16,000, and then we had some other miscellaneous fees that came in over by about $11,000 to offset some of that. And then our intergovernmental was over $41,000, and that consisted of a grantor's tax or tax on deeds, which was over about $47,000, and our enterprise or utility fund overhead, where they reimburse the general fund, was also over budget by $38,000. These were offset by sales tax for education coming in under budget by about $47,000. And as we look at expenditures, you see that we came in under budget on expenditures by a total of $640,000. And I thought it was important because I think historically, or at least in the recent past, we've came in a bit more under budget for expenditures. So I wanted to show the comparison between fiscal 2018 and 2017. The 640 that we came in under budget was about 55% of the 1.2 million that we were under budget in the previous fiscal year. And about $500,000 of that was related to city departments. And as we look at the variances there, I broke it down between operations, salaries and wages, benefits, and capital outlay. And as we look at operations, we see that the surplus that the schools had to return to the city made up the majority of that, or $261,000. Parks and Rec had $66,000 from operations, and the fire department had $31,000. And then there were some other smaller over budgets throughout the citywide. And salaries, we came in under budget $234,000, and that was primarily from the clerk of council, the fire department, codes compliance, planning, and Parks and Rec. In terms of benefits, we had, again, a mixed bag there, with health insurance coming in over budget in total about $83,000. That was offset by retirement coming in under budget by $10,000, and then some smaller variances and things like benefits like flu shots and also line of duty act. And then our capital outlay was spread throughout the city in various machinery and equipment accounts citywide. So with revenues over budget $906,000, expenditures under budget $640,000, that gave a operating surplus of $1.5 million. And that $1.5 million represents about 4.2% of the operating revenues. And on this slide, we show the expenditures in red, the revenue in green, and the operating budget is the black line from 2004 to present. And I think what's significant about this slide is the narrowing of the gap between expenditures and the budget, and really since the recession, but the expenditures were coming in under budget a bit more than we see this year. And of course, the revenues in the recent past has been more in line with budget. You've had a couple of years where you had a bit more gap, and then this year we finished with some additional gap, or more of a gap in the revenues than we did actually in expenditures. And then this graph shows the expenditures and revenues for several decades going back to 1983. And the next slide layers in the operating fund, or the fund balance changes from year to year. I will note, you see that fund balance going up a bit, and when I get to components, we're going to talk about the bond funds that we issued for new money for the fire and police station renovations that remain unspent. And since this shows total fund balance, that $13.1 million of the fund balance is for the bond funds. So we look at how we what added to our fund balance. We began the year with $31.3 million. We added our revenues of $42.6, our bonds, both the new money and some of the refunding, of $17.7, our transfer from utilities, and this was utility support of a capital project of $500,000, less expenditures of $45.7. In that expenditure number, it includes $4.4 million related to the bond refunding. Or I take that 3.9 because the other $500,000 from the escrow is pulled out separately. And then bond issue costs of $300,000 and the transfer to the public assistance fund of $1 million. We end with a total fund balance of $44.6 million. And looking at the components of that fund balance, we have what we term non-spendable because it's not available, it's tied up, and that money primarily is the property that we're holding for resale, a little bit of prepaids in there. And then the $13.1 million is the new bond money that's not yet been spent, and that's restricted for externally for a specific use. There's $15.8 million that's assigned in capital projects, and an unassigned fund balance of $12.9 million, which represents and equates to 35% of our operating revenue as our policy requires. We have cash totaling $40 million, and that's broken into cash equivalents of $22.2 million, investments, or that's invested in the state's local government investment pool of $4.7 million. And then we have investments, and if SNAP, we refer to it as SNAP, it's the state's non-arbitrage plan of $13.1 million, and that's our bond funding. Oh, and let me note too that our average yield for 2018 was about 1.13%. Currently, we're around 2.4%, so that is increasing since last year. Our utility fund had an operating income of $1.7 million, non-operating income of $67,200, and then the transfer out that we spoke of earlier in support of capital project of $500,000. That leaves us with a $1.2 million net position at the end of the year. And our working capital, we have total current assets of $8.1 million, current liabilities of, I think I misspoke, $8.1 million, current liabilities of $1.8 million, with a working capital of $6.3 million at the end of the year. And then we spoke about the pension fund. During the year, we had a total, or at the end of the year, we had a total liability of $68.9 million. We had plan assets of $58.3 million, leaving us with a net pension liability of $10.6 million. Of that $10.6, $9.4 is in the general fund on the government-wide statements, and $1.1 million is in the utility fund. We were 84.7% funded. That's an increase from the 79.4% last year. And we have two ways to fund our pension program. One is with contributions, and the other is with investment earnings. Our contributions for the year, the $1.9 million, was about $270,000 less than in 2017. But the investment income at $6.4 million was about $5.5 million more than the previous year. I believe in 2017 we had $915,000 in investment income. So the fund did well for the year. And then our other post-employment benefits that we spoke of earlier, we had two. One is the group life insurance. That's the first column. We finished the year with a liability of $815,000 for the group life insurance. And for the Line of Duty Act, a little over $1 million for a total net other post-employment benefit liability of $1.9 million, of which 1.8 would be in the government-wide statements general fund and $87,000 in the utility fund. The group life insurance is 49% funded, and the line of duty benefits are 1.3% funded. There are notes to the financial statement, notes 15 and 16, that provide a wealth of information, and I think Ann commented on the 30 pages that added to our CAFR. And I believe note 17, if you want more, or excuse me, note 13 in the CAFR in regards to the pension. And that concludes my report. I'd be glad to try and answer any questions if there are any.
A lot of information, a lot of good stuff, though. I think I'm particularly pleased to see that the gap between our pension liabilities and our net position is getting better. But that's largely it had gotten further away over the years because of the poor market conditions and lack of reinvestment. And so now that interest rates are getting higher, we're seeing that gap get smaller because the investment's larger into that pool. So that's good. So, I really don't have any questions. I commend staff for, keeping us under budget and expenses, and commend business and residents for paying more taxes to keep our revenues above what was projected. So I think we're in a good position. And in terms of position, I think one of the notes that I read here, I think we've got a lot of great opportunities coming forward. Questions, but I'm adding on to it so that maybe you don't have to come back to me and hear me anymore. But I think we're in a good position. And looking at all the opportunities with Midtown Road and future growth at Quarter Path are only going to add to the financial strengths. As business increase, property values increase, and businesses are more successful. So our revenue stream is going to be a positive one without having to look at tax increases.
I would concur with what Doug said as far as a lot of information, a lot of numbers. I appreciated the way that you sort of highlighted what was included in each category, and to his point about the financial strength and moving forward, I think looking at the local taxes, the recordation fees, and some of the building permits and things, that it just shows that there is some good movement in the areas, Midtown Row and other places in the city. So thank you for the presentation.
Just one question on enterprise accounting. How do we show reserves for capital requirements in the future for enterprise funds?
For the enterprise funds?
Utilities.
Well, it's part of their fund, so we can look at it. It would be investments in capital on that statement. On your financial position is what we have invested, which would include working capital, but we certainly can pull out a report for management that would better separate the working capital for review.
Do we have some report that shows the projected requirements in the future for?
Well, we have that in our plan, certainly.
That's part of the CIP process each year with the budget. If that's what you're asking.
Utilities.
Yeah, if you look at the budget, it's divided. The CIP section of the budget is divided into two parts. There's the general government capital improvement plan, and then at the back of that is a utility capital improvement plan that Mr. Clayton does.
Thank you.
Great. No questions. Just thank you very much, Ms. Dameron. We appreciate it. Do we need to take some action here?
I believe, Ms. Dameron, that you have to vote to accept both documents.
Oh, it says no motion.
Is that not right, Ms. Dameron?
I think that the presentation and will be asked
For some reason, I have the recollection in the past we've made a motion and voted to accept the CAFR as
audit.
That's what is typical.
Could we do that anyway, just
Let's-
in case?
Let's do it because I think it'll make us all feel better.
So I move to accept the comprehensive annual plan report fiscal year ended June 30th, 2018 as presented.
Second.
Ms. Bertram?
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Fryling?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Okay, this takes us to our 7th item under new business today, which is appointments to boards and commissions. Do you have a motion there?
I have a motion with several appointments. So I move that City Council reappoint Scott Spence to the Architectural Review Board for a term ending 12/31/2022. Neil Elwin to the Board of Building Codes Appeals for a term ending 12/31/2023. Andrew Edwards and Justin Schaller to the Planning Commission for a term ending December 31st, 2022. Kara Cook to the School Board for the term ending 12/31/2022. And further move that City Council appoint Melinda Morgan to the Board of Zoning Appeals for a term ending December 31st, 2023.
Second.
Ms. Bertram?
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Fryling?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pons?
Aye. Hard to believe we're talking about appointments ending in 2020.
Where has life gone? This takes us to the open forum portion of today's meeting. I have 3 speakers cards, which I will call in order, and after we've gone through the speakers cards, if anybody else would like to address council, please come forward, and I request that all speakers offer their name and address, and if you could keep your remarks to 5 minutes, please, that would be most helpful. The first card I have is from Ron Squire Steffi.
Sorry, I just came from Ironbound. Good afternoon, members of council, city attorney. Congratulations to our new official city manager and to the citizens behind me. I'm a original Virginian, lived here for a long time. I'm a retired educator, and I am here to ask for a Christmas present as a driver along Monticello Avenue. Monticello, by the way, as a historian also, was the term used by our 3rd President of the United States, Jefferson, Thomas Jefferson, one of my heroes. So I'm going to ask you, as also a guy with my initial degree is in philosophy, logic, and I've never been the same since, but that's another story. I'm going to ask you to follow me in your mind with what's called recall. That's everybody here and everybody behind me. Recall. So you're looking. Recall is from your memory. You're in the city. I think we're the only state some of you know, we're the only state in America, I believe, that has an official legal difference between city and county. So you're in the city, you're down in I'm looking at myself, you're down in the side with that has the trees, and you're coming up towards the city limit. You're looking the city limits, and it's 2-lane because I understand that's all state property on both sides, owned by the College of William and Mary, one of my colleges that I attended. So you're coming up towards the city limits, which is at Ironbound. You got that? Ironbound. 2 lanes on both sides. You see the woods. Now, right, you're looking right as you come to the city limits, and it spreads out. you hit some unbelievable bad street holes. And I've asked each one of you through an email over the past year or so to please get that fixed, and I've had no reply. And now I'm asking me and all the drivers who hit that section right there before you get to the city limits and ironbound, with all the holes are really developing badly there. Hundreds of people use it every day. So I'm asking you politely, as a Christmas gift, that you, City Council, with power, that's called power, do something about now, not in a week or a month, because it's been going on for over a good year, that you do something about those holes on our Monticello right before you get to the city. Because all those people going out to shop in the county, spending their money in the county, which doesn't go to you, need to get that fixed, please. So my Christmas present to you is, face to face, that you please, as a city council, use your power to get that section. If you don't believe me, as soon as we get to here today, drive out to Monticello, to the city limits, and see if you can negotiate the holes in the road which are in the city. See if you can do that, and then come back and let us know. So I'm asking you to do that this afternoon. You're looking, you're seeing, you're recalling what's going on. Thank you.
Thank you,
My
Mr.
Christmas gift.
Thank you for being here.
Anybody have a question?
No, sir.
Okay.
I'm going to ask Mr. Trivett a question and refer to Mr. Clayton. Even though that section of Monticello is in the city, I seem to recall that VDOT takes care of the maintenance of that piece of road because it is bounded by state property on either side. Is that correct?
I believe that's correct, yes.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Someone could just check with VDOT and see if there's something they could do.
Sure.
Sure.
I can't promise Christmas, but we'll get them working on it. The next speaker's card we have is Jay Everson. Good afternoon, Mr. Everson.
Okay, thank you. All right.
I'm Jay Everson, 103 Branscombe Boulevard. I do live in the county, and I do appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. The material I provided you today is in reference to the CIP proposal of the school board, reference to the elementary schools and high schools. The first thing you see there is what I actually had presented to the school board back on the 27th of November. Back on December 4th, Mr. Tahey and myself met with Mr. Stevens, the county administrator of James City County, and some of the information that we talked about in that 30 minutes is in the second page. The rest of it will kind of address some of the questions that were raised. When it comes to new school construction, there's two things you have to consider: capacity and projections. How many kids do you think are going to show up, and how much room do you have when they show up? You will find over the last several years that the number of kids who are showing up on the low enrollment projections is less than they projected. So when the future became present, the numbers were less. They've been consistently less now for about 5 years, and they're continuing forward the next 5 years on their plans. You will see a steady decline in the number of kids they're expecting to show up. In part, you can see, because of James City County, which is where the bulk of the kids come from, their average age is every year goes up. It's up to 44, over 44 years old. Not many kids when you're 44. As far as the high schools go, I do not understand how they could even suggest that we need more space. Their own projections on the low show an actual decrease in the number of students each of the next 6 years. Now, it would be probably fair to say that it's flat, but they are less. In all cases, 10 years from now, their enrollment projections are less than the capacity. The problem they have is very simple. They have a student distribution problem. They do not have a capacity problem. And it's because of what's going on in Jamestown and the under-enrollment at Lafayette, just drew a blank there, that's where the problem in high schools is. Now, as far as elementary goes, on the material here, on this section here, there's been a lot made of the very last form, which is all red. This is elementary school projections. Red is bad news. Problem here is that this is the first document that the school board or Future Think has used ever that includes pre-K in their elementary enrollment projections. Now, when this program started back somewhere in the early 90s, somewhere in that time frame, there was like 20 kids as a grant. It's up to about 342, according to this chart. They indicated at the meeting, school board meeting, is 356. They said that they're using 30 classrooms. That's the size of an elementary school. One of the things I think that needs to happen is we need to decide what an elementary school is. If you ask normal people out there, people who vote, what an elementary school is, they're going to tell you K through 5. They may say K through 6, depending where they came from. They may have junior highs. I am not opposed to the Bright Beginnings program, but it is not an elementary school program. These are kids that primarily have an IEP, disabilities, that sort of thing, down to 2-year-olds in diapers. Now, we had suggested in this document that we gave to Mr. Stevens that separate buildings, there's 4 schools now that have it, that instead of building a new new elementary school with about $2.5 million in fixed overhead cost, which would be much better off going to help special needs kids in Bright Beginnings, for example, which is about a $4.3 million program now, is that you build modular buildings or centers at 4 of the schools. I know it'd probably be hard at Laurel Lane, but we do have schools where we could put these facilities so they could still use the core facilities of the elementary schools without the administrative cost, extra cost, and as it'd be more appropriate. It's a lot cheaper. It came up at the board meeting Tuesday night. They seem to indicate 180 kids. It's hard to hear. I think they said 180 kids, about $4 million. So even at 4 centers, that's $16 million opposed to 38 without the fixed administrative cost. And my time's up, and I appreciate your attentiveness to me, and I thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Everson. My last speaker's card is Gary Shelley. Welcome, Mr. Shelley.
Thank you very much. I am Gary Shelley. I live at 205 Indian Springs Road. I'm speaking once again today about 110 Harrison Avenue. I speak of it because the underlying conditions that led to Council's ill-fated decision to fund the purchase of the property in 2006 still exist today. It is important that we understand and recognize these conditions and that we strive to correct them. The 110 Harrison project was a direct result of town-gown tension. It is no surprise that these tensions exist in a college town. It is Council's responsibility to address these tensions with measured consideration and wisdom that ensures that all are treated with respect and that all are made to feel welcome and valued in our community. This is not how our Council performed. Council went so far as to seek strategies to combat what they called threats to what they called our endangered neighborhoods. Received greatest threat was college students living in rental houses. Council cited dubious statistics regarding rental dwelling percentages in these neighborhoods. One councilman referred to the areas close to the college as blighted. Areas such as Indian Springs Road, where my family resides, College Terrace, Burns Lane, South Henry Street. This is laughable. One such strategy to combat college students was Council's approval to fund the purchase of 110 Harrison Avenue by the Redevelopment and Housing Authority. The RHA generally endeavors to provide affordable workforce housing, but the 110 Harrison project accomplished just the opposite. Two very affordable rental units, occupied at the time by members of the workforce, were upgraded at public expense, and the small 1,300 square foot property was eventually offered for sale at the astronomical price of $450,000. Council remarkably did not demand either an appraisal or an inspection of the property, which are standard safeguards associated with all real estate transactions, and quietly approved a loan of up to $310,000 of taxpayer money at 0% interest. The key to the project was the insertion of an owner-occupant deed restriction, ensuring that students would never again occupy that residence. David Cranbuell spearheaded the effort behind the scenes, although council kept secret the details of his efforts. Mr. Cranbuell was well connected to council members and city staff. A FOIA request later revealed that Mr. Cranbuell had already contracted to purchase the tiny property at an outrageous price of $275,000, a property that city tax assessor John Matson said was worth $147,700. Further misleading the public, city manager Jack Tuttle claimed in a memo that the property could be converted from a duplex to a single-family dwelling for $25,000 to $30,000. But by the completion of the project, well over $100,000 was spent on the rehab. I believe that number was $142,000. A figure not surprising, given the extensive upgrades to the structure. It is inconceivable that Mr. Tuttle could not have known that the project would require significantly more than the $30,000 estimate that he presented to the public. Council purposely misled an unsuspecting public by presenting the loan as an opportunity to purchase the property directly from the owner, and not as an assignment of contract for Mr. Cranbuell. Critically important distinction, which I will discuss next month. After unanimous approval of the loan by the council, Mayor Zeidler thanked Mr. Cranbuell for his efforts, without hint of what those efforts entailed. I fully intend to bring the concerns of 110 Harrison to an end. I look to our current city leadership with hope that student presence in our neighborhoods will be recognized and valued. There already is hope that our current council and our new city manager will bring a kinder, gentler approach to dealing with town gown issues. It is a sad reflection on the city that I find myself still speaking of 110 Harrison for the simple reason that the city repeatedly refused for many years to respond to simple, straightforward concerns. I encourage response from anyone who would like to add to this conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Shelley. If anybody else would like to address council, please come forward. Last chance. Seeing no one, we'll close the open forum. We do not have any items for closed session, is that correct?
We do, sir.
We do?
Yes.
Oh, for council?
No, this is for the Housing Authority. I'm sorry, nothing for council.
Okay. Entertain a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn council meeting.
Second.
Ms. Bertram?
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Freiling?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Very quickly, council will, we've adjourned, but the Housing and Redevelopment Authority will convene in just a moment or two.